Pre-releases for Altered's next set, Whispers from the Maze, start this weekend, and with it comes 3 new mechanics. Is the scout mechanic too good? Let's talk about it. Hey yo, what up? Welcome back. So what is in store for Whispers from the Maze pre-release? If this is your first limited Altered event, then I'll just cover it real quick. Each player is going to get a pre-release kit containing 7 booster packs. You'll then be tasked to build a 30-card deck, 29 cards and 1 hero, with those 7 booster packs. Unlike the standard Altered format where you can only play 1 color, in this pre-release or sealed event, you can play up to 3 factions. There's also no limit to the number of copies you can have in your deck, so if you open 7 copies of Sap Sniffer, you can play all of them if you want. There's also no limit to rares or uniques. Limited formats in Altered are very fun and exciting because there are interactions you can do that you literally can't do outside of Limited. But before we get into what's new, let's talk about what's missing. So of the 18 currently available heroes in Altered, only 12 of them are available in Whispers from the Maze. The same was true for Trial by Frost, although it was a slightly different lineup of 12 heroes. Personally, I'm glad to see Sigismar and Kojo take a break. It actually took me multiple Trial by Frost drafts to realize that not all of the heroes there are available. So hopefully this isn't too much of a gut punch and you're not missing one of your favorite heroes from this set. So what to expect in Whispers from the Maze? The gameplay in Whispers from the Maze revolves around your reserve. You'll be sending scouts to explore the depths of the underground city while establishing your camp and building up your resources at the surface. So similarly to Trial by Frost, which is the last set of Altered, they're kind of expanding on what you can do with the reserve and just making it more powerful to interact with. In Trial by Frost, there were things like exhausted resupply and exhausting cards in reserve to get some benefit. And in this set, there's going to be things like the Augment and passive support abilities, and even Scout to an extent, where you'll be interacting more with your reserve and just kind of expanding on strategies there. So let's talk about the first mechanic, passive support abilities. This set introduces passive support abilities. Instead of one-off abilities, some cards now have abilities that can trigger multiple times in reserve. Most of these abilities give boosts to your characters in reserve. If you take the time to trigger them, your characters will grow stronger, as well as sometimes trigger powerful effects. Each faction has a different passive. Keep this in mind during deck building. Ysmir even has some spells that function similarly, gaining additional power from reserve with arcane counters. So I'll talk about this in just a second. These passives have a maximum number of counters they can give. A card with an ability that says up to a max of 3 means that this ability can't make this card gain its 4th counter. However, this passive ability doesn't stop the card from gaining additional counters from other sources. And so they have some examples here. All 3 of these cards have passive support abilities, and that's indicated with this little infinity symbol in the bottom left. So like they were saying, these all trigger from the reserve when you do a thing. So in the case of this one on the left, this Bliss Guitarist, when you play another character with a base statistic of 0, I gain a boost up to a maximum of 2. So keep that in mind when you're building a pre-release deck. If you're playing Lyra, you're probably wanting characters with a base statistic of 0. And like they said, each faction has a different mechanism for triggering them. So in this case with Lyra, it looks like it's whenever you play a character with a base statistic of 0. For Bravos here in the center, when you play another character, so any character, I gain a boost. And for Ysmir here, when you play a spell. This is interesting because Lyra and Bravos play well together. So when you're looking to build a deck, maybe you want to lean into passive support abilities. Lyra cares about characters, but with a base statistic of 0. Bravos just cares about any character. So these, like I said, will play well together and just something to keep an eye out for. And a note here about these passive support abilities, they don't get these boosts or these effects when they're in an expedition or currently in play. So they only get these effects when they're in your reserve. Something to consider is maybe playing a hero, if you're playing a bunch of passive support abilities, picking a hero in your pre-release kit that can put these characters into your reserve. There's 4 heroes that come to mind. There's the 2 Axiom heroes, Traced and Subash. There's also Finn and Ren and Orchid in Muna. All 4 of these heroes have the ability to put characters into your reserve, so you can start triggering these passive support abilities right away. Of these 4, I'd say Traced is probably the least reliable because it won't be online for several turns, but the other 3 are perfectly workable in my opinion. So let's move on to the next one, which is Scout. Characters with Scout offer you 2 options when you play them from hand. Play them normally or play them for their cheaper Scout cost. The second option allows you to trigger their played from hand or played from anywhere abilities, but you'll need to send them to reserve in exchange. Scout characters give you added flexibility. They can be used similarly to cheap spells in the early game, but also offer powerful stats once you have access to more mana. Quick note about the rules. When playing a Scout character, you can choose in which order you resolve the played from hand / played from anywhere ability or to send to reserve ability. In most cases, this doesn't matter, but for some cards like Swift Jin, it's quite relevant. So let's take a look. There are 2 examples here. They have Ysmir Mothbreeder and Swift Jin. So the Mothbreeder is 4 from hand, 2 from reserve, 2/2/2 with Scout 2. So you, instead of paying the 4 from hand, you can pay 2 from hand to immediately send it to reserve. When you do that, you create a Mana Moth 2/2/2 in target expedition. Okay, so it doesn't even have to be the expedition that you play this in. And the Swift Jin says Scout 3, 6 from hand, 6 from reserve, 5/5/3. You can play me from hand with 3, send me to reserve. And Swift Jin's effect is when you play me from anywhere, you may put a card from your reserve in your mana zone. And so they called out Swift Jin here because what you can do, you can stack these triggers in a way where you can pay Scout 3, send Swift Jin to the reserve, and then mana it. You may not always want to do that, but they are calling it out here because it is likely what you'll want to do with this card. Personally, I think Scout is the most powerful mechanic in this new set, and there are some relatively obvious combos with Scout. I think the most powerful combo is going to be with the hero Etsadi. Etsadi cares when you play high mana cost cards, and a lot of these Scout cards have high mana costs. Take Swift Jin for example. You can pay 3 mana and trigger your Etsadi hero because this has a hand cost of 6. So you get to draw a card and put a card into your mana. Even outside of the pre-release or Whispers from the Maze limited format, I think in constructed, even standard format, Scout's going to be quite powerful. Just another example off the top of my head is if you have a way to give a character anchored. I know there's one new character from the set, I think it's the Minotaur, that can give itself anchored. And let's say you're playing Floral Tint, which is a very good Muna card already. You lose the Floral Tint that you've only spent 1 mana on. This combo I think is very good and easily playable in a standard format. Some things to consider when you're building your deck that might have Scout characters in it. If you're playing the Tasia hero, which is available in this pre-release kit, you have to be really careful that you don't play a Scout character first. Because if you play a Scout character with Tasia as your hero, Tasia will give that character a boost, and then you lose that boost for the next character that you play. So just be really careful there. That's going to be a really easy thing to miss. Then even outside of the pre-release, if you're building a constructed deck, there's some really popular cards that I wanted to call out just to make sure you're aware of and how that interaction works. A popular card, especially in Bravos, is Arcolano Milk. This says when a character joins your expedition, it gains fleeting. So with the Scout mechanic, when they immediately get sent to reserve, since they have fleeting, get discarded. So be very careful about playing that interaction. It will be super easy to get burnt. So onto Augment. So Augment is a new keyword that allows you to choose a card in play that already has counters and give it an additional one of the same type. In Whispers from the Maze, there will be many relevant targets. Characters in reserve that have gained boosts thanks to their passives, boosted characters in your expeditions, or the cycle of landmarks in each faction that gains counters. It's worth noting that Augment doesn't work on heroes, however. That's a really important detail. There are certain heroes that want counters. I just talked about Etsadi. So you can't augment your opponent's Etsadi and make it worse, for example. If you've played Magic the Gathering, Augment is very similar to the Proliferate mechanic. So these are the 2 examples for Augment here. Sap Sniffer, we've got 1 from hand, 1 from reserve, 0/1/1. When you play me from reserve, you may augment target card in play or in reserve. Very straightforward mechanic. It's clear that they wanted another way to manipulate cards in your reserve, and this plays very well with the passive support abilities. Worth noting with the passive support abilities, they usually say they go up to a maximum. With Augment, this Augment effect, you are actually able to go above that maximum with these effects. So if you have a passive support ability character that has gained their 3 maximum boosts from whatever their trigger is, you can actually augment and continue to gain boosts on them despite them being at their maximum according to their passive support ability. I'm a little bit worried about passive support abilities because they're going to add a lot of cognitive load to your match in that you'll have to pay attention to your triggers when you're playing things a lot more closely in your reserve. You'll also have to pay attention to your opponent's reserve. This may not be that big of a deal in a limited format or a pre-release format, but in constructed, this is just going to be another layer of complexity that I'm a little bit concerned about. Outside of the pre-release or limited formats and altered, I think Augment's going to be a really cool mechanic to add to the standard format. There's a relatively underpowered mechanic like Seasoned, where you can put counters on a thing and they keep them when they go to reserve. Augment's going to allow you to add counters to those Seasoned cards right away while they're in play and while they're in reserve. So to wrap up with some of my closing thoughts, I think Augment paired with the passive support abilities are going to make the pre-release format a lot more interesting than some previous ones. I expect it to be pretty engaging to manipulate and tinker with counters on your permanents and your characters, and finding really interesting lines to augment things that aren't very obvious. Personally, I think the biggest winner is the Scout mechanic. I believe this mechanic to be very, very powerful, and honestly, I think the uniques that we'll see with Scout could be extremely backbreaking. I will not be surprised to see uniques with Scout 1 that do something insane, for example. Keep your eyes peeled for uniques with the Scout mechanic, and I hope you have fun at the pre-release. And if you're watching this later, then I hope you're enjoying brewing with Whispers from the Maze. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.